Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Hebert, Director of Communications here at St. E's, and welcome to the second episode in our Region 10 series. Now, before we begin, I am going to share with you a brief word from our sponsor, Leader in Me.
Why Leader in Me? Leader in Me isn't as much about doing things differently as it is first seeing them differently. When one principal reimagined what school could be for her students, her teachers, families, for her community, who would have thought that vision would see over 5,000 schools around the world, transforming how they proactively create the learning culture they want to see in their buildings. And you're invited to join this community of seeing the power of leadership as a choice rather than a position, of taking the talk of whole child learning into whole person teaching practice, and getting hands-on with real social emotional learning at school and at home, helping others see what they don't yet see in themselves. That's the adventure and the promise of Leader in Me.
Okay, thank you to our sponsor, Leader in Me. So today I have with me Karen Bronson, St. E's Director of Professional Learning, Molly Hagan from the Region 10 Executive Board, and our presenter, Cindy Gallagher, St. E's Director of Government Relations. So Molly, I'll turn it over to you so you can say a brief word on behalf of Region 10.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. We have a small crowd, but glad that everyone that is here. And we're excited today to welcome Cindy Gallagher, the St. E's Director for Government Relations, to our Region 10 series to talk about current educational events, COVID and beyond. So I'm going to turn it over to Cindy. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thanks, Molly, and thanks for those of you who are hopping on. I'm going to just jump right in. I hope that you will be feel free to ask any kind of questions that you can think of. And I would like to ask you a couple of questions so that I can get a sense of what some of our members are thinking about some of the more current issues, especially when it comes to some of our relationships and events with the New York State Department of Health. So welcome all, and we'll hop right in. Michelle, if you might be able to put up that first slide, I want to make sure that I'm grounded at least in giving us a sense of where we were exactly this time last year.
Okay. All right. Advance the slide, Cindy?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yep. So as some of you, I hope maybe find helpful are the daily updates that we were doing throughout last year and are still doing, but less, not necessarily every day, but as something important comes up that we need to get to you right away, either regarding some legislation or any COVID updates. So this was the one that we did last October. I'm sorry, I put the date October 2021 on, but it should be October 2020. And what you can see, although small, I'll highlight it, is last year at this time, we were at 4.57% positivity rate statewide. So 4.57, and today we're at 4.23. So I'd like to be able to say what a difference a year makes, but in this case, I'm afraid the saying would be what a difference a year doesn't make, because the difference between 4.57 positivity rate and 4.23 it's not too far of a stretch that we'll get there pretty quickly. So, and at the same point, then Governor Cuomo was, we were all dealing with green zones, remember those, and we were talking about mitigation and focus zones and all sorts of things where we are not, at least we have many more strategies than we had last year. Michelle, if you want to advance. So with the, as I look at the beginning of this first year, I honestly, from all of our members, really think that this is a much more contentious year, not because of a new governor. I think actually from what we've seen, Governor Hochul has really taken on quite a bit and provided some stability. I say that one of the things we were most proud of saying at the conference is that the governor and the New York State Department Health Department had not released any new guidance every Friday night. until the day before Thanksgiving last week, when they released a new guidance at exactly 4:15 the night before Thanksgiving. So I'm going to have to hold judgment on, that I see some differences, but there certainly is more advanced planning that we're seeing. We've already been asked as an organization to have input into ideas for her state of the state. So it's a different approach, and I think it's a welcome one. But certainly the issues facing all of you, I'm not telling you how contentious things are. You read it in the news, but we, not only are you still dealing with COVID, but you're dealing with an awful lot of complex issues within your local districts and within your boards of education. We're dealing with in-person instruction, whereas this time, even though the rate was 4.57, most districts were certainly remote. We're dealing with all sorts of new staff shortages, and we're still doing COVID testing, tracing, and quarantining. So, Michelle, if you could pop to the next one, I really want to start talking a little bit of specifics and ask you a question. So this is the guidance that came out last Wednesday, and I won't go into all of these points. I really generated this PowerPoint more for your future reference than for me to use it as a one-by-one talking point. The first thing that they did on the 28th was extend that mask mandate in school. So the reason I'm even introducing that is we have had all sorts of questions on mask breaks, whether mask breaks are now allowed. And certainly through this extended mask requirement, no. They definitely said mask. Now, do I know that, and you know that kids must, and you are using your most judicious thinking when it comes to students of when sometimes we need a break from mask wearing, but the Department of Health did not take a step back on that. So as far as they're concerned, masks are required in school when it's in school, not outside. Now, back to some of the, what I really wanted is the first bullet about testing to stay. And the reason I'm asking, I would love your opinions if you can just chime in on this one, is we are meeting with the commissioner tomorrow. We have another meeting with her on the 16th. And in between time, we have a meeting with the Department of Health. Now, test to stay. That certainly has been in the news, but basically what it is it allows close contacts to avoid having to leave school because of being a close contact. And what it basically says is that if you can do 7 consecutive days and show a negative rapid test or antigen test, then you can stay in school. The kicker, and I raised this to, maybe you saw, Molly, an email from me that I get out to our government relations committee. The kicker here is that the only person, this is not a statewide policy, only the local Department of Health can make this decision. And it has to be available, it has to be made on a county-wide basis, right? So the local county health department are making county decisions. It's not a statewide policy. They must make sure that it's equitable, meaning we can't charge parents for this across the district. And further, the New York State Department of Health is not supportive of this policy. Why is that important? So even though they're saying local health departments, you can go ahead and do this, they're at the same time saying we're not going to support it fiscally. So if a local county Department of Health, who's already having problems finding sufficient quantities of tests, it's making it very difficult for many counties to pull the trigger and make this decision. Now, with that said, and Michelle, maybe we can pull down the slide just so I can, talk a little bit, just have a conversation here. That being said, the superintendents, though, are really pushing, the Association of Superintendents are really pushing to have this policy become statewide. So I have a feeling tomorrow's conversation with the commissioner, she's going to get a lot of, and so this conversation with the commissioners, with the superintendents, the school boards, the teachers association, us, on trying to influence her work with the Department of Health. So I guess what I'd like to throw out is, if you had to say within your, just speaking for your district, if there were less obstacles to doing this test to stay, would it be a policy that would be attractive in your district? Would your district opt to have kids stay in school rather than go to the 10-day quarantine if there was negative test results that were reported prior to school beginning. Any thoughts on that?
So Cindy, I'll jump in just real quick. I think I'm probably in the minority in the state, actually. I'm in Madison County, which is one of the only counties that's already doing test to stay. We're doing in-school testing if you're symptomatic in school to stay. And then also we are moving into the test to stay as a county. So I'm a big fan, only because we've seen this, the students that we've seen unable to stay or unable to return are students that need to be in school most. So I'm very supportive of what our county is doing in terms of giving that support and access to the people that need it most where I am.
Chuck, I know you came in a little late. We're talking about the idea of maybe your district being favorable or not favorable to test to stay. Any other thoughts, Mary, Donna? And please feel free to pop in or not pop in. I'm just trying to get kind of a general consensus.
Yeah, I think I'm at West Hill outside of Syracuse. I think the parents would give some pushback about actually doing the testing for seven straight days. Is that what I understand?
That's correct. Yep.
I think the tough part is having them get tested. Like the parents of means might be able to do that. The kids that might not have the support to go get tested 7 times, would we do the testing in school?
That would be something that, yeah. So Mary's just indicated that her school is doing the testing. I had some responses from members today that they can't do that because of the transportation. So you're right. It would be a problem for parents. Let's just say parents who work. Let's just take that category. Parents who work who have to get that test done sometime between the evening and the morning and get the result back to get the morning results reported into the school system. So that is in some areas of the state that was reported to me this morning as being problematic. So yeah.
Well, I think that's problematic. I mean, in theory, I love it. I mean, we'll get the kids to stay in school if they test negative, but I do think that it would be difficult to have kids tested 7 days straight unless we did it in school. So to be determined if we have that ability, I guess.
I wonder if it's fair to say that if parents had that option, they would appreciate having that option rather than not having that option. So I just didn't know, it's more of a question for Cindy, whether there is any attempt to kind of hear from parents a little bit in terms of whether they would like that option to test. And also if anybody sees the benefits of having a uniform approach across the state rather than the patchwork. You know, I just think a lot of parents, their focus is on keeping their kids in school as much as possible. So I think it would be important to at least have them register some kind of opinion on that.
I think some parents would like that.
Go ahead, Mary.
I do think some parents would like that. We're not currently testing. What we are providing is both, we've had a vaccination clinic available for families that so choose to participate. We're offering diagnostic testing for families off-site if they need help finding places to actually get testing done. And soon we should be looking at doing screening within the buildings of both unvaccinated staff and putting out a survey to families to find out if they would like their child to be a part of the screening testing within the building. So they'll screen kids as long as the parents say it's okay to use my child as a screening. Yep. It'll be pool testing. That's what we're currently looking at doing, but it has not started.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Mary.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I heard maybe somebody trying to pop in.
Oh, I was trying to pop in. It's Donna Mcguire from New York. Well, we're all from New York, right? From the city. We have a million students and they are doing random testing. We had to ask the parents to sign off that they are okay with it. And to tell you the truth, we have a very low amount of people that signed off. Students I know that are in my school that's K-8, A lot of the students say they have been vaccinated. Now, I don't know how many will go for the booster, but it's not the same in all districts. So New York City has about 35 districts, but in the eyes of the state, it's considered one. And so I don't know how they would step up this policy, but I follow every day the New York City Department of Education. I look on the COVID tracker, and since last Wednesday, there has been quite an uptick in cases. For students, it's usually doubled what the adults are. And if, you know, we were talking, I think it was Karen or Michelle or maybe Cindy that was talking about like last year and what the differences were and the strategies. But if you remember, we were not allowed to travel to different states, especially around Thanksgiving. And this Thanksgiving, everybody was traveling, right? And so I feel like we're going to have an uptick again, and I'm not sure how we're going to handle it.
So for those of you who might have come in, the reason I'm pressing on this is that we have several meetings with the commissioner coming up, as well as the Department of Health. And, you know, what we're trying to do is I'm trying to get a nice representation of how our members are feeling about this. I think one of the other issues right now, Donna, this is outside of New York City that I'm speaking, but other education groups like the superintendent don't feel that the quarantine has resulted, how can I say this? Let me put it in a more positive, that there has been no uptick in the amount of COVID cases due to quarantining at all, that the kids who have been quarantined don't usually receive a COVID positive test. In fact,
that's right.
A study that was I just read, it was literally released last year. Now, it wasn't done in the United States, it was done in the UK, but only 2% of the kids who were quarantined were ultimately had a COVID positive. So, you know, from an instructional, that's, I think we're trying to find the right balance here, but you are correct, as our, you know, as with COVID has taught us, the decision we make today is so often undermined by the, you know, for the reality of tomorrow if the cases go up. So, all right, I appreciate that, you know, that conversation on test to say. I don't want it to beat it to death, and we can come back to it if you have other thoughts, but I wouldn't mind going through and making sure that you have some other information in front of you as well.
Cindy, the only thing I would say, I think that would be important for them to that last piece that you talked about is, I think, the most important piece. Like, the data they should be looking at is the number of positive cases that have happened in quarantined students. I think that's the most important data that should be talked about and looked at. Especially last year to this year. Like, that to me is the biggest piece, is that's the data that's the information they should be looking at. Like, how many positives have resulted from the quarantine process for the last year and a half. And that should be one of the driving decisions to whether or not changes are made in that field.
Right. And, you know, one final note too, if we think about last year and this year, cases may be cases, but the severity, the hospitalizations and deaths among those cases, you know, I don't know if we have that comparison year to year, but this has been the year when many of us have gotten vaccinated. So there still may be cases, but the severity of those cases and the need for hospitalization and, you know, God forbid, death might be very different than it was too. So there are all kinds of statistics around this whole thing that are just overwhelmingly confusing, I think, to lots of people, certainly including me.
Cindy, just one question.
Go ahead, Mary.
Okay, I just have a question regarding what you were referring to as quarantined. I know this year specifically, they know that we're going to send kids home. So parents are keeping their kids home that are sick, and they are bringing them to the doctor, and the doctor's determining whether they're to get COVID tested or not, or if it's something that's typical that they are determining is not COVID related issues. And if the symptoms subside, they're coming back in. It isn't necessarily that they're being quarantined, or I should say, the Department of Health here is really behind. I mean, literally, kids could be under quarantine and they've only got a couple days left of their quarantine before we're even notified that they are. Like, they're really, really behind. So that part isn't helping at all. But families are being way more cautious about how they're sending kids in and what kind of symptoms they might have to get sent home. Because we have sent kids home, but they're not necessarily officially quarantined, and they're being, evaluated by their practitioner as to whether they need to be COVID tested or not. So I'm just curious where that data fits in, because we do have families who are, that would normally send their kids in because they have a headache or whatever, but
self-quarantining. I'll raise that. That's an excellent question, Mary. I can just really quickly tomorrow get to my contacts at DOH and see how I don't think they are I don't think they're capturing it at all, but I want to make sure before I go out on a limb and say it, but I'm pretty sure I'm correct on that one. Chick, I want to make sure that I'm not missing you. Sometimes it looks like you're about ready to hop in and then not so much. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you, Cindy, but I'm just listening and trying to wrap my head around the challenges that these practitioners face. I don't have anything to offer to that particular conversation.
And I promise you some of our topics will get a little bit lighter as we go through this PowerPoint. It won't be all quite this serious. Just a couple more things from that latest bulletin, if I could just highlight them for you. So when kids were out and returning to school, because there was a backlog of how long it took to get the test results back, they made a slight adjustment that said that the test doesn't have to be just a PCR test. It could be a rapid test. That's a minor one. I don't want to talk to all of them, but there is also, just like you could test to stay if the local county Department of Health made that decision, they are also can do that for testing and reducing the time for quarantine. So it could be reduced to 7 days if they got a test result back that was negative, and for 7 days, you could get out of quarantine 7 days earlier instead of 10. But again, that would have to be made on a countywide basis. So again, not many county local health departments have made that decision, but it is allowed. Mary, did you have a point? Your hand was up on that one.
I was just going to say our county made that decision quite a while ago. So it's just very interesting to see where our state is on this. And I think that we talk about like equity in education, and I'm all for what's happening in my county, but it certainly is not creating an equal playing field for these kids. Even right here in Region 10, I was at West Hill today with Mark and talking about that they're not test to stay in Onondaga County. So like 2 neighboring school districts are not under the same rules. And I think that's probably where the problem is.
That's why
not an equitable solution.
And that's why the commissioner's getting a lot of pushback on whether this trying to work with Department of Health to make it a statewide. Michelle, maybe if you can take a second to put the PowerPoint back up, and I want to go to the slide that is titled NYSTRS. Yep, there it is. So this happened late last week as well. And the wording that I will read it for those of you who are driving, I don't want to do it, but it says unpaid, it's about unpaid leave of absences, and it really does fit right back into the conversation we had, but not too many folks have seen this. So this is right out of the NYSTARS website bulletin. I think it was number 14, but it was definitely the November bulletin. And I think it is really interesting. It's not a change in policy, but think about the implication here. It says unpaid leaves of absences are not reported to the system, and employees do not receive service credit for pension purposes, even if such employees continue to be eligible for health insurance and other employer benefits. So that means if there is staff who have opted not to be vaccinated or are not willing to be tested on a weekly basis, and if there are staff who go on unpaid leave of absences, that time does not count towards for pension purposes. Again, that's not a change of policy, but in the context of where we are right now in December and just when this came out late November, I think it's interesting. And the link to that is in the PowerPoint that Michelle will put on the website for Region 10. And I don't know if you're going to have time to put it in the chat bar or not, but this is available to you. And Tony's going to send it out tomorrow. I know he indicated he would. All right, any thoughts, questions on that? I can move to state ed if you'd like, or if you're ready.
Cindy, just a question for clarification.
Yep.
Going back to that previous slide,
Yeah,
do I understand you to say that that's not new language, and that would be true for any reason why somebody's on an unpaid leave of absence, correct?
that is correct, Mark. And I'm saying that with certainty because I have talked with our attorneys here to make sure. I had wording in the daily update yesterday that I wanted to change to make sure that it was accurate, because I had said this is a new statement. It was newly released, but it is not a new statement.
Okay.
It is
Right.
a policy that has been in existence.
Yep. Thank you.
Yep. And as I said, the link to it is in the PowerPoint, and they also have a number that you can call if you have any questions on it, but it certainly puts a different spin on things. Michelle, if we can go to the state ed one. I want to just talk a little bit about things that are new at state ed, which maybe new isn't quite the word, but they're focusing in on. One of the ones I want to hit is building leader and teacher certification. Many of you know Don Nixon. He has been just been amazing when it comes to certification problems and working with state ed. But as you all know, certification for building leaders and what they accept as building level credit when you're among buildings, and the fact that it has to be, one full year in one building. Don has been working with them for ages to try to get them to be reasonable about this kind of thing. He has made a lot of progress. And so within the last 2 months, Commissioner Rosa has indicated that she wants her senior staff to work closely with us to see what areas could possibly be modified. And we had a long meeting with senior staff. Don came in with probably 15, 20 recommendations, looking at, what would be considered mentoring, that it would, to make that more consistent. Maybe looking at the reduced number of years that you have to have as a building leader in order to be certified. So I just want to make sure, and they've been terrific. In fact, Don got a response excuse me, yesterday in regard to mentoring. It was in a specific individual member, but they're being very, very responsive. So if you know of any certification problems, excuse me, in terms of your members or your colleagues having trouble with certification, please let us know right away. It seems like we're getting some movement in terms of flexibility. Sorry, let me just take a drink there. And one of the regulations last month that was passed is they put in that calculating a year of experience could be done in a variety of ways, as long as it kind of came up to be the equivalent to 180 days. So that was already put into regs last month. I want to talk about their waiver. You might see that if anybody looks on their webpage. So here we are, we're talking about quarantines, we're talking about students being out of instructional, out for and having reduced instructional time available if they are quarantined or for COVID other reasons. So we have been pushing all of the major educational associations to really suspend the 3 through 8 assessments again. State Ed's not budging on that one. And I think maybe for those of you who are at the conference, you heard Commissioner Rosa say that they are they're going full implementation this spring. But interestingly enough, they put out a request for comments. There's a committee called Title I Committee on Practitioners that Saney's has been involved in. In fact, all of us provided a lot of pushback at that last meeting last month. And State Ed say, okay, we'll put in for a waiver from the accountability system again. So they put that out, but I'm a little concerned that the public didn't quite understand what that waiver is for. So let me just talk about 2 things quick. State Ed is willing to ask the United States Department of Education to put in a waiver for 2 things: that they would not have to report the results of the 3 through 8 testing publicly, how you have to put on your report card, and that they would not use that data on the 2021 assessments to identify schools as needing support. It is not a waiver from the suspension of the 3 through 8 assessments. And I am not so sure that folks really understand it because the title on the webpage says waiver from accountability. Well, yeah, but it's kind of minor as compared to the main game, which is waiver for the suspension of the 3 through 8 testing. So, you know, as we see our numbers change, again, for COVID related reasons, we are going to raise this with the commissioner and then in 2 weeks to see if they could, you know, continue to think on this issue with us to openly as I'm just not sure how that's going to go again. One thing I do want to bring up to you, and then I'll stop for questions if there are any. This upcoming January Regions, we've had a couple of questions from our members saying, well, Cindy, what are they going to do when in fact kids are quarantined and can't take this assessment? So I asked my contact at State Ed how they were going to handle such absences, and the response back was kind of less than favorable. We're not doing anything. We're not going to make any special considerations. And the next time that exam, that Regents exam is offered is when the student would have a chance to take it again. So we're going to push back very hard on that one at our meeting, our one-to-one meeting with the commissioner. And I just can't believe that would be, that's really not a great situation. So any thoughts on assessments, the waiver, or the upcoming January Regions? Have you thought about that issue for January? No? Okay. Does that ring true as a problem, that could be a problem for your students who may have to forego taking a Regions for no reason that they are responsible for? I mean, if they're quarantined?
Cindy, my only thoughts on the January Regents, especially because we've had, you know, there was no August Regents and there was limited June Regents, is that the January Regents are usually used for like a credit recovery type situation. They're not typically, if I'm speaking for, I guess, my high school, they're not typically, we don't have large numbers of students taking them. They're usually doing it for a second time or some sort of credit recovery situation. Yep. So I don't think we're going to run into the same issues because of the exemptions from June with that. So I wouldn't see the January Regents as a big issue related to quarantine or having mass numbers of students not able to take it, because I think most districts probably don't have huge numbers of kids planning to take it.
Thanks, Molly. I appreciate that perspective.
Do any of the high schools, Molly, that you know of have students take it in January? Almost kind of as like, let's see if you pass it in January before waiting for June, especially if they were concerned about someone having the credits in order to be able to graduate.
We do, Mary, but that's also like kind of a luxury of the January Regents. So right. If that happened, like if we do have students that sit for the English 11 Regents in January, but if they were for some reason not able to take it due to quarantine, they would still have the option in June. So I don't think that it doesn't present as a huge issue to me as a high school principal.
I knew in the history of ours that they have historically allowed, especially the English 11, for them to participate in that earlier. I would be very worried about it in June, though. I mean, would that mean that some of your potential graduates can't graduate and have to take it in August?
Yes,
that would be more my concern.
It would be a bigger issue in June for sure.
Yeah, and we'll keep our eye on that one for sure, with all of your help. And yeah, I cannot stress enough how I rely on all of the input from our members that I get daily. I welcome it. We need it. So anytime you want to drop a line on anything, please do not hesitate. APPR, we haven't heard a thing on it, but we are absolutely already going into legislative meetings. This is not an SED issue, but we always raise it to the commissioner because we figure she has enough, coordination with the second floor, the executive chamber, that everybody needs to keep pressing on this. We've heard nothing, and our biggest complaint is going to be, again, and what we want to avoid is the decision on APPR made in May, when you guys have already done all of your evaluations or done due diligence to do that. So just want you to know on that one that we're pressing that issue as well. Michelle, if we can flip to the next two just really quickly. Just want to make sure that you all know or are reminded of the schedule for the next generation learning standards. Just so you are aware, and it's coming up 2023. I know that doesn't seem possible, but that is going to be the first administration of the new math and ELA. It is the first time that the new standards will be embedded in the 3 through 8 assessments. So 2023. And the next slide pertains to the science. And that, I believe, is in the spring. Yeah. And I know this is tough for you to see right now. It's, please look at it when you get the PowerPoint. But the first use of the assessment using the new standards is in 2024, which means backing up that, you know, and I know that NICET, my colleagues at NICET are very concerned about where districts are currently in preparing for 2023 and 2024 as far as the first administration of new assessments. Lord knows you don't have enough to do. Lord knows you're not overburdened with everything. And so they've pushed it out. I've heard nothing. These charts were just presented to the Board of Regents at the November meeting. So they're, you know, I think they're going to be hard pressed to move off these timeframes. So just to keep that in the back of your mind. All right, you got any thoughts, questions on those two pieces? Concerns? Okay. Michelle, if we can move forward. Okay, this one's an important one. There are a lot of slides in this PowerPoint about federal funding. Not going to go into them all. But as you all know at this point, we were very fortunate school districts to receive a lot of federal stimulus money. The good news, bad news is that all has to be obligated very quickly. So the first pot of money, the third bullet towards the end, 9 September 2022 is when all of your funds from that pot have to be used up. The same for the next two pots. And let's just talk about the American Relief Plan, which is the largest pot of money that you all just received. That all has to be obligated, which means you have to have contract. It doesn't mean you have to have spent it, but you have to have obligated it by September 24. So your plans can be amended. I know that many of your districts, your districts are supposed to be putting those on your websites. I haven't seen too many websites that include those yet. State Ed said they are going to be posting them on the SED website. I haven't seen that yet. So it's a lot of money for a lot of purposes related to helping our students come out of the pandemic. That was the original purpose for all of these pots of money. But Michelle, if you can kind of go to the next slide, I believe. Nope, next one. It's kind of a chart. If you can go, I'll hit that on the next piece. Next one. Yeah, there, this one. When you get the PowerPoint in hand, just take a look at this. The use of those monies is very, very broad. It can be used for construction. It can be used for building administrator stipend incentives. It can be used for capital expenditures, instructional materials, staff, but just be careful because when this money goes away, whether your school districts will be able to sustain what you've put in and use this money. So, you know, the great news is that we've received this amount of money. Hopefully you've been involved in the discussions on its use. That is what I feverishly hope. Although I think from some of my discussions with many of you that isn't necessarily the case. So thoughts, concerns right now about the federal stimulus money, because it's going to impact what I talk about next, which is state aid.
Your suspicion is accurate, Cindy.
Yeah, I hate to be a suspicious person by nature, but I just, yeah, between you guys not being all that involved in some of the discussions and then needing to really get it out the door. And here's my fear. And the reason I'm a little, I guess we've been all around this education business a while now. And I know that we're going to be asked to prove how we used it and how it impacted students and how it benefited students. So my worry is the accountability at the end of this process. We haven't seen too much of that right now. But my guess is because you had to submit plans and because they're going to be posted or supposedly, you know that there's an accountability factor here. And I just want to make sure that we're keeping our eye on all of this and reminding all of our districts and members to please, please, please keep in mind that there has been lots of money. And the reason this is important, I'll go to the next slide. Michelle, if you could hit the one that says state aid. And there's, yeah, I'll talk about that. Yeah, right there. It's going to drastically impact what we asked for in state aid, because not only did we get a lot of federal money this year, we got an increase in state aid, right? So every district got some increase in their state aid. And it was, let's see. Yes, this time last year, we were looking at a $14 billion deficit. And if you remember, right, Governor Cuomo was pressing the congressional delegation to get to Washington to make sure that we were getting that stimulus money, because New York State was the first one to be hit with the, I mean, you could almost hear his daily conferences, right? But all of that money was restored to foundation aid. So we got an increase of $1.4 billion increase to state aid. We also got increases in expense aid. We got pre-K. Most districts, 62% saw a 2 to 3% increase. And we got a promise in statute that is historical. We got a promise that is in statute, and I know you've heard it before, because I've heard it before, but that the foundation aid would be fully phased in for districts according to the original formula within 3 years. And when you talk to the legislatures, I know Mary was involved with, Amali was involved with the GRC. When we go there to thank, Senator Mayer and all those who have been instrumental, the first thing they say is, we put it in law. So don't be suspicious, but we're going to be suspicious anyway. Now, why is that important? Because this is the time when you start advocating, when we start talking to the legislature and state ed about what we want to ask for foundation aid this coming year in 2022 session. So that's what we're all trying to figure out now, is what are the most important asks for state aid? And we're looking for stability, of course. That will be our first ask, whether, make sure that promise is kept. And so right now, there's a lot of discussions going on what that state aid, and we will always ask for an increase. Be certain of that. I mean, there isn't a year where we haven't asked that it be increased, because there are certainly your safe, harmless school districts who need an increase. Your CTE programs need an increase. Both these salaries need to be increased. So there is enough to keep asking for, but I have a feeling again that the openness to asking for a great deal more is going to be pretty narrow. And I think, I'm just about at the end of the things. While I'm looking and leafing through my pages, any questions that you came into today with, or that you want answered, or any areas that you want me to discuss? Have one more quick one that I want to hit. And Michelle, we can take down the PowerPoint at this point then. I want to talk about some questions that I get from members almost all the time. And that's do you, Karen, I'm going to take that early retirement. Do I foresee an early retirement incentive perhaps being part of the legislation? No. Just plain no. There was we pushed it this year. We didn't get very much of a response on that at all, especially as as the state continues to look at all sorts of staff shortages. It's kind of a losing argument that it would be great to lose another X percentage of people due to early retirement. So that's one question. The other is, are you doing anything about the COLA or the cap, the COLA being on the first 18,000? We are supporting the legislation. I plan to make that a big part of our advocacy this year. So those are two things that I expect that we will be pushing this legislative session. I'm not sure that it'll be an interesting session. I don't know if the legislatures will be coming back into Albany or continuing to have most of the meetings by Zoom. So the commissioner has not resumed meetings in person with her, nor has the Department of Health. So right now we're kind of still acting as if it was last year in the summer. So that is a whirlwind trip around all things state ed, all things federal government, all things kind of Department of Health. We're meeting new friends every day. We hope they're new friends every day, but I'd be happy to take any kinds of thoughts or concerns that you're facing every day in your districts, or questions or thoughts.
Cindy, I was just going to ask the same question that you just answered, so thank you. And it's interesting because I guess a question would be, what would be the incentive for the state to provide an early retirement incentive when informally it seems that so many people are interested in retiring now in droves, because if this is totally informal, unofficial data, but we've been running some retirement workshops through our sponsor Equitable, and people are flocking to those workshops, and that's kind of an interesting thing. So it was just, I'm glad you brought up that question and answered it, because it's certainly not for lack of interest, that's for sure.
No, it is not for lack of interest. Well, yeah, I so appreciate you all getting on and even requesting this kind of a meeting. I love Tony for suggesting it. I thank Karen and Michelle for being so willing to always meet the requests of members. So this was a great opportunity for me. It's always nice talking with you all, but please take me up on my my sincere request to hear from you all at any time. Your questions are great.
Thank you, Cindy. This has been really great. Thank you so much.
And
Bye,
just a
all.
reminder, you can find Cindy's email address on the Saney's website at saneys.org.
Yep. Can we just go over how will people get the PowerPoint? Will it be on our website? How will it be available?
Yep. I already put it in the chat room. It's already on the Region 10 page on the website. And I'll post a recording of this video also on the Region 10 page. And you'll find both those links, the direct link to the PowerPoint and the link to the Region 10 page are in the chat room right now.
That's awesome. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Molly. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Region 10 and Cindy.
Everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
all. Have a good
Good to
night.
see you.
You too.